Andrew Martin, the newest Chancellor of Washington University in St. Louis, talks a lot about bridges, not just about actual bridges that cross the river, although he does mention the Eads Bridge in his inaugural address, but about metaphorical bridges that are created by the institution he leads, globally and within the St. Louis community. In fact, he believes that Washington University is not just in St. Louis, but for St. Louis.
At Washington University, we are a bridge between past, present, and future. We build bridges between faculty, staff, and students, between doctors and patients, between students and alumni. We intentionally build bridges across differences as we aspire to become a place that is both diverse and unapologetically committed to equity and inclusion, because we know full well that diversity on paper is one thing and equity and inclusion are another.
The title of Chancellor Martin's inaugural speech was Momentum, and he's already put several bold initiatives into motion, offering free tuition to academically qualified low-income students from the St. Louis region, and breaking ground on a new $600 million medical school neuroscience building in the Cortex Innovation Center. I sit down with Chancellor Martin at this pivotal time in the history of Washington University. In our in-depth interview, he talked about his plans for the university's future and about his love for St. Louis, for baseball, and for building bridges. And now, a conversation with Andrew Martin. Chancellor, thank you for taking the time to sit down with us and chat a bit.
It's my pleasure.
Let me go to the very tough hardball questions first. Who is Andrew Martin? What's he like personally? What's your background?
So Andrew Martin is a Hoosier. I grew up in Lafayette, Indiana. My parents and one of my brothers still lives there, and I grew up in a Midwestern town with a major research university. Had a typical childhood, but I always was fascinated by two things: politics and mathematics. I decided when I was looking at colleges, I sort of scanned the country and decided to enroll in the College of William and Mary in Virginia, which is a great public university, but also a university
history
steeped in American history. And so for a history junkie like myself, to go to Williamsburg for my undergraduate days was a really special experience. I went there and I studied the two things that I was most fascinated by: politics and mathematics. I did a degree in mathematics and a degree in government. And it wasn't until very late in my undergraduate days that I realized that those two interests could come together. And in fact, bringing those two interests together are what first brought me to Washington University over 25 years ago. I learned as an undergraduate that there was a field called political methodology, which is how do you use mathematics and mathematical models to study and understand politics. And it turns out, as it is today, that one of the best places in the world to do that work is at Washington University in St. Louis. So I applied to come to WashU as a graduate student to do my PhD in political science. I'd never visited St. Louis, but the first time that I came here, I was an admitted graduate student, looking around, kicking the tires, trying to decide if this is the place that I was going to come to do my doctoral work. And I fell in love with Washington University. I fell in love with the community in St. Louis. I told the other universities that admitted me, no thanks, I'm going to be enrolling at WashU. And so I enrolled here in 1994 as a doctoral student in the political science department. And then my career sort of rolls forward from there. So I guess to answer your question, who am I? I'm a Midwestern kid who's interested in politics, interested in mathematics, and has fallen in love with St. Louis.
What about St. Louis made you fall in love?
So I think there are many aspects of this city that I've really come to deeply appreciate. The first has to do with the humility of this city. I mean, this is a city that has such great institutions, great universities, great cultural institutions, great sports teams, great restaurants. And even though we have some of the best institutions in the world, there's a humility of the people who live here, which I think really gets down to the Midwestern roots that makes St. Louis what it is. This is also a city on a scale that's very manageable. I can tell you can live here as a graduate student in St. Louis and actually have have not a meager existence, but actually a full existence. And so for me, coming here to this place, beginning to meet folks, particularly folks here at the university. It's a bit counterintuitive, but almost everyone at Washington University has come from someplace else. And those of us who are here at Washington University have chosen to be at Washington University. We've chosen to be part of the St. Louis community. And so the enthusiasm for the people that I worked with every day as a graduate student, worked with as a member of the faculty, and now work with as chancellor, it's just palpable, the passion that people have for the city in which they live.
It's interesting because it sounds like you and some of the other people here at WashU have found the same thing that I did when I moved here in '72. There's so much here that the people who grow up with it take for granted.
Absolutely.
That just makes my jaw drop.
Yes.
What a wonderful city.
Yes, so much. There's so much here to appreciate. I mean, from our history on different time scales. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can think about pre-revolutionary history. You think about the 19th century and the sort of the Industrial Revolution. St. Louis is, in a sense, in the center of the Industrial Revolution here in the United States. You look at the early part of the 20th century. We're one of the largest cities in the United States, the most important transportation hub, home of the World's Fair, which, of course, the Washington University campus inherited thereafter.
Absolutely.
It's just an amazing history, a history that I think it's important for all of us in the community to learn and embrace.
And judging by all those things across the desk behind you, you're a Cardinals fan too, aren't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I became a Cardinals fan when I moved here in 1994 as a graduate student. I remember taking the Metrolink downtown and buying, at the time, very inexpensive tickets and sitting in the bleachers, watching a couple of Cardinals playoffs runs in the 1990s. And then thankfully, when I came back here as a faculty member, my wife and I had season tickets. And before our daughter was born, we'd go to about 30 or 35 games a year. I continue to get down to Busch Stadium as much as I can. It's a really special place for me personally. It's a place that I really love spending time when I'm able to get away from the office. One of my favorite St. Louis memories was Game 4 of the 2004 World Series, and of course we all know the result of that. We get swept by the Red Sox in a historic win. But I was able to invite my father from Indiana, and my wife was able to invite her father, who was living at the time from Seattle, and we were able to take them to a World Series game. And both of them told us they never imagined in their lives that they'd be able to go to a World Series game, and
wonderful memory.
To be able to bring them here to this city to see that historic game, even if we were on the wrong side of the result, was a really special thing. I got to throw out a first pitch in September. It was a total thrill, and it was also the scariest thing I've ever done.
You didn't bounce it 3 times all the way to the plate,
I didn't bounce it. It was a little low and outside, but it would have gotten the third strike.
Aha. So he says.
That's what I say. No, it was a lot of fun, and I worked with our baseball coach. I threw a baseball around quite a bit, but I'd never thrown off a mound before, and certainly not in front of 40 or 50,000 people. So I went over to the baseball field a couple of times, had a couple of training sessions with the baseball coach and some of our team. And
a little bit nervous the night before?
I was very nervous the night before. I was very relieved when I didn't embarrass myself.
Yeah, because those videos live forever on YouTube, don't they?
They do indeed. They do indeed.
What convinced you to take this job, to be number 15 in the long, proud history of this organization?
Well, I can tell you it didn't take a lot of convincing.
They didn't have to twist the arm too hard?
There was no twisting involved. I was on the faculty here for 14 years. I finished my PhD in 1998. I taught for 2 years at Stony Brook University in New York. And then I was invited to come back on the faculty, first in the political science department, and then over time in the law school, because much of my scholarship looks at the U.S. Supreme Court.
Sure.
And we left St. Louis in 2014. And we left because I had an amazing opportunity to go lead the Arts and Sciences College at the University of Michigan. I decided that was the next type of opportunity that I was looking for, and it turned out that Michigan made an offer that I couldn't refuse. But we weren't leaving St. Louis because we wanted to leave St. Louis. In fact, as my wife always reminds me, but for your job, we never would have moved to Ann Arbor.
So it's your fault.
It was my fault to the University of Michigan. We, of course, heard the news, as everyone else did, that Mark Wrighton was going to be retiring as Washington University's chancellor. My wife and I had many discussions, and ultimately I came to the conclusion, I said, well, why the heck wouldn't I throw my hat in the ring We love Washington University. We love St. Louis. We have family here. We have friends here. And wouldn't it be amazing if I could return in this role? So I threw my hat in the ring. I thought I didn't have much of a chance. I was a dean at a great university, but there were, I'm sure, sitting university presidents and provosts and others that had deeper experience who were interested in the position. But I just went through the process. Multiple rounds of interviews, meeting lots of people, sort of laying out what I thought the future of Washington University looked like. And I remember I finished my interview my last interview on a Friday afternoon, and I flew back to Ann Arbor that afternoon, had a big dinner out. I had some extended family staying with us that weekend. And then on Saturday morning, I was at my daughter's Little League baseball game. And she'll want me to tell everyone. She was playing in the boys' Little League in Ann Arbor, the only girl playing in the league.
Good for her.
Loves playing baseball and had a wonderful experience up in the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Little League. And so she was out on the field playing the game. And my cell phone rang. And I looked down, and it was area code 314, so I knew what the call was coming from. And I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I thought maybe they were going to do reference checking or anything else. And it was Craig Schnook, the chairman of the board, and he offered me the chancellorship. I accepted on that phone call. I said, we'll get the lawyers to figure out a contract and terms, and
sure.
I'm sure you all take care of me just fine. And then I got to take my daughter home, sit down with my wife, and tell them that we're going to be moving back to St. Louis. And they were extraordinarily happy.
So you said, honey, two things. She won the game, and we're moving back to St. Louis.
Turns out she lost the game.
Oh, well,
which actually turned out to be kind of a good thing, because it meant the tournament was over. It wasn't going to be one of those weekends where we were going to be watching 6 or 8 games over the course of 3 days.
Well, you mentioned that you told the search committee your vision for the future of the university. What is that vision? How do you see the university connecting to the community? What is its obligation to a community?
So I think the obligation to the community is something that we really need to put front and center. At my inauguration, I talked about 3 different pillars, 3 different things which I think we need to focus on for the next time period, say that the next 10, 15, 20 years. One of those is academic distinction. That is, how do we do the very best education, the very best research that we could possibly do. Part of that is in our competitive nature. I mean, we're competing with other leading universities, and we need to make sure that we're as competitive as possible. But it's also about impact. How are we ensuring that we're delivering the very best education to our undergraduate students, our graduate and professional students? And how is it through the research that we do at the medical school, at the Brown School, in arts and sciences, in engineering, how do we ensure that that research is most impactful and makes the world a better place? And so that's one area of focus. Second area of focus has to do with access. If you think about the students that we're bringing here to Washington University, we're all about bringing talented students. The student component is multifaceted. One important part is ensuring that talented students here in the St. Louis region, that Washington University can help serve them. One way, of course, is by attracting them and supporting them, they can come here as a student. But we also do a lot of work with high school students around the region to help prepare them to enter universities. Some of them might come to Washington University, but we have expertise in higher education, and so part of our responsibility is to bring that expertise out in community and help folks be able to navigate what for many families is a very complicated system. It's also the case that we're involving our students in lots of community-based education and in research projects which are directly relevant to the lived experience of folks living in St. Louis, whether that's students in our architecture and urban planning courses, students that are working with our Gephardt Institute. Students are learning a lot about themselves, learning about society while they're out in community helping
a bit of service learning then.
Absolutely. It's something that we've been doing for quite a long time through the Gephardt Institute here at Washington University. And I think we have a real opportunity to involve even more students in those efforts. The third area in the inauguration speech had to do explicitly with St. Louis. And in fact, I used the language, which I repeat, we use on social media and lots of other places, is that our name is Washington University in St. Louis. Right? That we changed our official name about 40 or 50 years ago to distinguish ourselves from lots of other universities and colleges with the word Washington in it. But I think also to signify the importance of St. Louis to our mission. We, of course, exist because the St. Louis business community in the 1850s decided that this new frontier city needed another university to help drive the future of the community. And what I called our community to do in our inauguration address is to be Washington University for St. Louis. And so to think about everything that we do to ensure that it's helping to benefit this region and ultimately the nation. And of course, we do lots of things. We're in the education business, right? So as we educate, what are the ways in which we can open more educational doors so more people can get a Washington University education? How do we do more research, particularly in areas like public and community health, that are going to have real, meaningful impact for people on the ground every day here in St. Louis? How do we, as an employer of 17,000 individuals who spend millions of dollars a year on capital projects, how do we use our role as the third largest employer in the region to help uplift more people in the community? That's what I'm calling on our colleagues to do going forward.
So if there's a WashU bubble, you want to burst that bubble. You want to be of the community.
If I could be the bubble burster of Washington University, that would be a major accomplishment.
Or maybe a plaque on your wall.
That could be.
Speaking of that, you've been a dean, you've been a vice dean, you've been a professor, you've gotten more awards that say distinguished and outstanding educator and all that than anybody has shelves to put them on. What about education hits your heart, hits your soul?
Oh, so I love teaching. I really love teaching. I've always loved teaching. And in fact, I continue to teach, and I'll tell you about my class this semester in just a second. But I really got the bug first as an undergraduate. I was actually given some opportunities to work as a teaching assistant as an undergraduate. I was able to work with some very distinguished teachers here when I was a graduate student. And when I began to enter the classroom and begin to teach the two things that I've always been interested in, I teach lots of courses in statistics and mathematical modeling, and I teach lots of courses on the Supreme Court and about judges in the United States and how they make decisions. I've just loved the time in the classroom with our students, and whether that's 100 students in a big introductory statistics course, whether that's 15 law students in a seminar, that's the thing that continues to put fuel in the tank. And that's why, as vice dean, as dean at the University of Michigan, and now here as chancellor, I continue to teach. This semester, I'm teaching a course called Free Speech on Campus. It's a bit of an experiment, but what we're doing in that class is we're working with a group of talented 50 undergraduate students. We have 4 law students who are helping us along the way. And what we're doing is we're working through the public policy, we're working through the doctrine, we're working through the history, the philosophical foundations, and the social science around the rationale for free speech. And then we're working through a series of 10 complicated cases that we've drawn from around the country of where free speech values have intersected with other values on college campuses. It's just the best part of my week is spending time with the students in that class.
Not as much fun sitting in this office pushing paper around.
Not so much.
That human interaction and seeing the light bulbs go off must be something special.
Absolutely. It's the best part of my job. I mean, the diversity of the types of people and the roles that they have that I get to interact with on a daily basis is really mind-blowing. I mean, whether I'm spending time with political leaders or business leaders here in the St. Louis region, spending time with our alumni, our students, our faculty, our staff. We have so many talented people here at the university and talented people in the community. And I oftentimes pinch myself that I actually get to sit down and have lunch with some of these people that I knew about as a student and as a faculty member, and now as someone I consider a peer and a colleague. And we continue to work together to make the university a better place and to make St. Louis a better place.
You mentioned your work on free speech on campus. That's been a big issue nationwide and one of the challenges higher education is facing. What are your thoughts on challenges facing higher education today?
So I think the most fundamental challenge facing higher education today is cost. It is prohibitively expensive for many students to attend some of our great universities. And so the question is, what do we do about that? I think, unfortunately, as a society, the government has decided that we're not going to take on this problem. The federal government has a Pell Grant program, but that program is quite modest.
Yes.
And most states have divested from their great public universities. What I'm proud of is at Washington University and at many of our peer institutions, we've taken on that responsibility. We've taken on the mantle of using our resources and going out and working with our donors and those who support us to raise additional resources to ensure that anybody can get a Washington University education that has talent. That's true of the leading private universities and the public universities here across the country. I'm really proud of the fact that Washington University is a founding member of the American Talent Initiative, something that was organized by the Bloomberg Foundation with the idea of, bringing together leading universities and getting us all to commit to putting more resources on the table to ensure that students with disadvantaged backgrounds are able to attend our universities. We've made great progress at Washington University year over year. It's something that I'm very proud of. But as I think about higher education more generally, I think it's our biggest challenge. How do we ensure that talented students are able to attend whatever university is best for them?
You made a very bold financial move when you ended your inaugural address. And that really went out on a limb. And you were sending a message through that,
Yes.
weren't you? Who were you sending the message to, and what message did you want them to get?
Well, I was sending a message to every high school student in the state of Missouri and Southern Illinois. And the message is the following. If you have a family income of $75,000 or less, or if you're eligible for a Pell Scholarship, you can attend Washington University free of charge. That was the message. And the message was really straightforward. Washington University is a university that's all about attracting the very best talent, regardless of what one's previous opportunity is or how much money you or your family happen to have in their pocket. And so I just wanted to make the message as clear as possible. And I hope I don't think it's any clearer than free of charge. That if you've got the talent and you can get admitted to this place, that we're going to make it possible for you to come here without a dollar out of your pocket. And I think that message has resonated well across the state, across Southern Illinois. We, of course, continue to spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year on financial aid to support all of our students with need. But this was really a targeted effort to hold the talent here in St. Louis and the St. Louis region, to hold more of that talent here in the region.
So it's not an elitist, you must have a legacy to get in. You can, if you're talented,
if you're
the door is
talent,
open.
if you have the talent, we're going to make it possible for you to attend.
I'm interested in your answer to something that I hear a lot, is that higher education is not for everyone.
There's lots of reasons why people choose to go and get a bachelor's degree and enter college. Some of them are doing that just for the intellectual curiosity. Some of them are doing it because it's an entree into certain professions where having education is necessary. And some are doing it for other very practical reasons, or because their parents think it's the right thing for them to do. I'm fully on board with the idea that a higher education is not for everyone. What we do have to think about, though, is that as we think about students, particularly in those high school years, we need to make sure that they have very clear and robust pathways into employment, right? Because the most important thing about one's success, one's self-esteem, one's ability to contribute back to society is having a great job. And there's a diversity of jobs that are out there in the marketplace. As I think about what we're doing at Washington University, we're only preparing our students for a narrow slice of that diversity. And we need to do that at a very high level. But there's a role for lots of other types of institutions, educational institutions, apprenticeship models, and everything else, to ensure that full diversity of individuals, the full diversity of talent, are able to be matched into the workforce in the right place.
You're new on the job, but look down the road 40 or 50 years when you're about ready to hand over the reins to number 16.
Yes.
What will Washington University look like then, if things go the way you hope they go?
My ambition for Washington University is that 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, is that we continue to be recognized as one of the finest universities in the world, that continues to create world-changing knowledge and continues to educate students across all of the disciplines at the highest level. And that Washington University has been one of the institutions that's led the continued renaissance of the city of St. Louis and the region. That this place is looked at 20, 30, 40 years from now as an incredible story of how this how this post-industrial city with this amazing history and these wonderful institutions were able to pull together and to continue the progress we've seen over the last few decades. For Washington University to have played not the leadership role, but for Washington University to have played an important role in that renaissance is something that I would be incredibly proud of.
Now help me with something. I can never remember which way it goes. Is Washington University the Harvard of the Midwest, or is Harvard the Washington University of the East?
Harvard is the Washington University of the East.
I thought that was what it was. Looking over my shoulder at the camera there and addressing the 3 million people
Yes.
in our audience, what would you like them to know? What would you like to say to them about yourself, about Washington University?
I'm an incredibly fortunate individual that education has continued to open doors. I pinch myself every day that I sit in the office that Bill Danforth and Mark Wrighton once sat in, and my wife and my daughter continue to remind me that I'm the same old guy that I was before I was the chancellor.
Keep your feet on the ground, do they?
Absolutely. I think the other thing that I'd really like folks in the community to understand is that Washington University is an institution that is deeply committed to St. Louis. The people who come here as our students, the people who join us on our faculty, have chosen St. Louis as a place where they want to live and build their family and build community. And I know at times, particularly in some communities, we're perceived as being an other, that we're not really part of St. Louis. And I think that that's certainly not who we aspire to be. Mm-hmm. But I think if you look at what we're doing, if we're doing through our healthcare mission, research and education, the investments that we're making here on campus and across the city, I think is evidence of our deep commitment. But of course, we're in the show me state. And I think for those of you who are out there listening, mm-hmm. I think in the months and the years to come, I think it's going to be important to look and see what it is that we're doing. Where is Washington University placing our bets? How are we using our resources? I hope that the Washington University pledge to help attract more undergraduate students from the region is a step in the right direction. But folks out there are going to see what it is that we're up to. Some of the challenges that we're beginning to think about is that where do we go next? Where do we go next if we continue to grow? And that's for where our students will live, and that's true for our academic spaces, our office spaces, and other sorts of things. That's something we're going to be wrestling with over the next 5 or 10 years.
You mentioned the Bill Danforths and the Mark Wrightons. There must be a lot of pressure in this office, too, to try to keep everything going. That you don't want to be the one who blew it.
Well, that is certainly the case. I mean, interestingly, both Chancellor Danforth and Chancellor Wrighton and I were all selected to take this job when we were 45 years old. And Bill and Mark both served 24 years. I'm now in my 13th month, so I've got a long way to go. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that one of the best parts of this job is been able to return to St. Louis, but also build a personal and a professional relationship, both with Bill and with Mark, to really understand, what it is that they went through when they were in this office, what are the challenges that are facing the university, and how ultimately they responded to those challenges. I mean, both have left incredibly big shoes to fill. I think I probably put enough pressure on myself in order to do a good job. But I view this as a solemn responsibility. I mean, this is an institution which has given so much to me personally and so much to thousands and thousands of students across the world. And I view it as my job is to make sure that we're able to continue to do that for thousands and thousands of people to come.
And this office puts you in a very big leadership position in St. Louis.
Yes.
People are going to look to you as an example and to lead the way.
Yes, absolutely. One of the important implications of that is that it's important for me to be as engaged as I possibly can with everything that's happening in the city as we begin to look at and work on some of the things that are most challenging. It's not typical for a university president, I think, to be as tightly intertwined with everything that's happening in a city. I think we're unique in that respect. And I view that as another part of my solemn responsibility.
Chancellor, thank you so much for taking the time.
It's my pleasure.
Good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
I want to do an exit interview with you in about 30 years.
All right.
That works?
Terrific.
Okay.
Let's book it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.